Hello, and welcome to the Department of Design Research, Writing, and Criticism here at SVA. My name is Molly Heinz, and I'm the chair here. And we are thrilled to have you join us for the 4th annual Phil Patton Memorial Lecture. We're on quite a roll here, and I can hardly believe it's been 4 years since we launched this event. I wanted to say a few words about Phil, who was a journalist and critic who wrote about the design of everyday life in numerous books and a variety of publications. He's probably best known for his byline in a long-running column in the New York Times, where he covered cars and car culture. But if you would like a full immersion of Phil, pick up a copy of Top This and Other Parables of Design, which is a selection of Phil work that was proposed by his colleagues and friends and published by the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in 2016. Phil was a key faculty member for our graduate program in design criticism from the time it launched in 2008. And he taught a seminar called Typologies that continues to influence how we run the show here. There is a critical question that really framed the entire course in that first session, which is, how does design reflect society? Phil always had a hyper-democratic approach to what could speak to that question, and his point of view shaped the way we define design here in the program today. That is, anything human-made intended to serve a function. So even though Phil isn't here today, I often think to myself, Phil would have loved this. And tonight I've asked Anne Quito, who's a design journalist at Quartz and the co-author of a forthcoming book with Milton Glaser and Walter Bernard, to join us to lead a conversation with Rob Walker following his talk. Anne is trained as a graphic designer, and she received a master's in visual culture from Georgetown University prior to receiving her MFA here in design criticism. And Anne was the first recipient of the AIGA Steve Heller Prize for Cultural Commentary in 2017. And if you know her work, you'll agree that she herself is an expert noticer in the tradition of Phil, and along with tonight's speaker, Rob Walker. But before I bring Rob up to the podium, I just wanted to say a big thank you to the Patton family, especially Phil's wife, Kathy, my co-conspirator for this annual event. Our department is particularly grateful for the donation of not just Phil's legendary coffee cup lid collection, which you'll hear more about in a second, but also Phil's entire journalistic archive, which is being painstakingly cataloged by a group of SVA archivists. And in years past, I've shared a couple of the gems that have emerged from the archive, like the Next Computers press kit with identity design by Paul Rand, or some of these great vintage mail order catalogs, which I'm sure are destined to be part of a future master's thesis. And I can imagine Rob Walker having a field day in Phil's archives. Rob and Phil have had parallel journalistic careers in some ways. They both wrote columns for the New York Times. Rob wrote the Consume column for the Times Magazine, and for the last 5 years, he's written the Workologist. He and Phil both wrote for the Design Observer and are both included in the new Design Observer book, Culture is Not Always Popular. Rob writes about design, technology, business, and the arts. He also writes the human resource column for Lifehacker, has contributed to Bloomberg Businessweek, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, Design Observer, as I said, The Organist, and many other publications. And he created and wrote the ad report card column for Slate. He's authored Buying In, The Secret Dialogue Between What We Buy and Who We Are. And his new book, The Art of Noticing, is going to be coming out on May 7th, just, I guess, almost exactly a month. And he is on the faculty of MFA Products of Design, just upstairs from us. And we are also very proud to say that he is on the faculty for our Design Research Summer Intensive Program here in this department. So, without further ado, Rob, please come on up, and let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Kathy and the Patton family. It's an honor to be able to do this. I have a feeling that I'm not going to say a single thing that Phil Patton would have needed to hear. But he might have recognized, he might have enjoyed it just the same. I did not know him, but I was a great admirer of his work, as I'll will come up as I'm talking. And thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you for giving me a little bit of your attention. I probably don't have to spend a lot of time convincing you that attention is a precious resource these days. There's this idea of the attention economy, and everyone feels distracted, and that their attention's under assault. And it's all the cell phone's fault. We check our phones 150 times a day, and so on and so forth. I don't think it's actually all technology's fault. I think that this idea of the fear of missing out, which is kind of what's underneath all this, predates any hashtags. And I think it's a natural thing to kind of want to be aware of what everyone else is paying attention to and give it some thought to. I think the problem is now we have so many things that we can pay attention to that I kind of wonder, missing out on what exactly? I always like to check Twitter once in the morning and see something about dogs and something else about YouTube stars and think I'm not missing out on anything. And when we live this way, we do miss out on other things. And I always like to ask if anybody here is aware of what phase the moon is in right now.
You want to know?
Yeah.
It's a crescent moon just over the west.
You're the winner. Somebody always knows, but most of us don't. And there was a time when every human being on the planet literally knew what phase the moon was in. Douglas Rushkoff makes a point about this and encourages people to. He's a very eloquent writer on technology and its sort of discontents. And he makes an interesting argument about why you should be aware of where the moon is. It's just a sort of way of doing something about our relationship to the world. And I like that general sentiment. It's important to me because I think that it's the solutions that we're being offered right now to the problem of distraction in the attention economy are sort of unrealistic, I think. Just throw away your phone or wait for some other technology company to introduce something that solves the problem for you. I don't think those are really very helpful. And that's kind of how I ended up landing on this idea to do this book that is coming out next month, which is set up as a whole bunch of suggestions or assignments or prompts to, as I put it, build your attention muscles and give you something tangible you can do in response to this world that we live in. Just spending an hour a week really devoted to controlling your attention and to the art of noticing, what I'm calling the art of noticing. So I'm going to run through tonight. I'm not going to do all 131. This is just not quite enough time, but I'm going to do 7. And while I go, I'm going to also try to make the case for why this is important, why it matters, and in particular, why I think it's important to notice things that others have overlooked. And this, as one example, we mentioned so here's my prop. I don't usually get to have a prop, but this is actually part of Phil's coffee lid collection. This was a very famous article that was published probably in 1994 or something like that. Is that right? And made a big impression on me at the time. I think it was maybe the first piece of design writing I'd ever really read. I just thought it was fascinating and a real tribute to noticing and why seeing the value or seeing the interest in something that everyone else overlooked can be so powerful. And I think that transcends design and writing. I think you could look at examples. I think Jerry Seinfeld's comedy is based on this. I think Warren Buffett's investing track record is based on this. Billy Beane, the baseball executive, noticed things that other teams overlooked. Rachel Carson sort of invented the environmental movement by paying attention to pesticides that were actively trying to be hidden. So I think that it's important, for reasons that go well beyond design. I do use a lot of examples from the arts, as you'll see. This is Nina Kachadorian, is one of my favorite working artists right now. I use a lot of these kind of examples because they're so clear, but I think they're applicable. For example, I see noticing as kind of the spark of creativity, and I think that applies not just to artists, but to a scientist or an entrepreneur or a coach or even a journalist, if I dare say. Because frequently what you want to do is, in many fields, is come up with the thing that makes you break from the pack. Okay. So the first of my 7 that I'm going to mention, I'm going to actually spend the most time on. Sorry. And it's because it's a good gateway exercise, and it actually is my gateway to this, how I got started on this project in a lot of ways. I was, some years ago, taking a trip to San Francisco, a city I've been to enough times that I don't want to say I'm over it, but I'm not like sort of gaga about, oh my God, the architecture in San Francisco, it's so amazing. Like I've kind of seen it all. And I was going to have a lot to do on this trip, so I wouldn't really have time to make any dedicated sightseeing maneuvers. So I gave myself an assignment to just pick one thing to look for everywhere I went. Not for any particular reason or goal, but just to give myself a kind of new way of experiencing the city that I'd seen before. So the thing that I picked was not hot dogs, and it was not goofy retail signage. It was, my one parameter for the assignment was that it had to be something that no one wanted me to notice. So it was the security camera. And it was an enlightening exercise. You see them everywhere you go once you're looking for them. And they have different personalities, and they seem to have different goals. Some security cameras seem to want to draw a lot of attention to themselves, like this one, with kind of mixed results, because it's, hey, look out for this security camera, and it's actually been vandalized, which is about as much of an object failure as you can possibly have. Meanwhile, other security cameras don't seem to have that same function at all. Like, I don't think those are deterring anything. These cameras are actually in New York, because once I did that assignment for myself, I continued to see security cameras everywhere. I noticed security cameras everywhere I went. And in fact, my wife was aware that I was doing this. I'd been talking to her about it. And when I got to the airport in San Francisco at the end of that trip, I said, all right, so the plane's on time. And I got to tell you, the security camera situation in this airport is bananas. Like, there's incredible amounts of these embankments of things. They're amazing. And she knew I'd been spending like 5 days photographing security cameras everywhere I was going. She said, Rob, please don't walk around the airport photographing all the security cameras. She had a point. Anyway, but I did become super hyper aware of them, and I wrote some stuff about security cameras and became interested in projects involving security cameras. People were sending me things. This was a project in Europe to celebrate George Orwell's birthday. They put party hats on all of them. So these kind of noticing assignments, though, where you're just looking for one thing everywhere, they can have a function. It can be explanatory. This is one of my favorite examples. This artist, you know these spray paint marks you'll see on the street, like what exactly do those correspond with? Well, they usually actually have to do with infrastructure, or in this case, internet infrastructure, and this artist did this handy guide. You can also be sort of celebratory of things that aren't meant to be celebrated. Does anybody know what these marks are? They're buffs. They're meaning that there was graffiti there and the city came along and wiped it out. But this photographer, Matthew Martin, got interested in the buffs as a form and did a really neat book on the subject. And let's see if this is an online project. Who can tell me what is being collected here? Upside down ends is the winner. Typography is a great one for these exercises. You can do something less complicated than upside down ends. The last example in this series is, this is one of my favorite street artists right now. He's in Australia, Michael Peterson. He works under the name Miguel Marquez Outside. And here the subject is weeds. And if you can see, that's sort of a disused building there with some giant weeds out front. There seems to be some kind of a ribbon and a plaque. And what is that? Oh, it's the Urban Weed Award for tallest weed. And that's a fun variation on it. I like the idea of taking something that's sort of generally regarded as somewhere between boring and nuisance and looking for superlatives, you know, the deepest pothole or the most picturesque sidewalk crack or whatever. So that's the first one. I also like to start with that one because it's visual, and I think that when we think about noticing the visual element, we're very visual creatures. And that's natural too, but I do encourage people when they're thinking about this subject to think about all the senses, to spend time listening, to spend time thinking about the sensation of touch in various situations that you're in. And I'll tell you another one of these that's in the book that I actually do a lot, which is cover 433, meaning spending 4 minutes and 33 seconds listening, essentially. This is a reference, as probably most of you know, to the famous John Cage composition, which consisted of someone sitting in front of a piano for 4 minutes and 33 seconds not playing it, which was not a popular performance the first time it was done, but it's caught on since. It's probably his most famous work now. And I actually do this, and I find it a sort of interesting way to just take in the sounds of my neighborhood or my house or whatever. It's kind of somewhat analogous to a meditation practice, but the difference is that I've always felt, I'm sure there are people here who have a meditation practice, but I've always had trouble with it because I always feel like I'm not doing it right. And I know that with 433 I'm doing it right because I'm just doing it. But anyway, I like doing this, and I thought maybe we would just all do this together, right? No, just kidding. Just kidding. But it's a fun thing to play with, and you can build other exercises out of it. I now another assignment that I do is pick 5 sounds that define your neighborhood, things like that. And I joke about the meditation mindfulness connection with this, but I do think it's real, and it's something that people seem to yearn for now. And I notice companies are now sort of doing it. It's another direct reaction to this kind of attention panic moment that we're in. Okay. So apart from just those kind of personal things, this idea of building your attention muscles also can lead to innovation. And this is probably the closest I'll get to really design-related talk tonight, because this is what design is in a lot of ways, is changing is to could be. And the example that I'll point to is a guy I like a lot, or whose work I like a lot, who calls himself the Rotten Apple, who works also on the street without permission, so his real name is not public. But for example, seeing a bike rack and converting it into a chair. He works in New York, and as you know, there's never enough places to sit down on the street in New York. He'll see a fire hydrant and see it as a place where he uses these discarded cutting boards that he's converted into chess boards. And sometimes my favorite pieces of his, he doesn't alter the landscape at all. He just points something out. So this is a crosswalk, but it could be a place to quickly bang out a few pull-ups. Very nice. Now, when you're learning to see this way, to see possibilities, it doesn't have to be serious. A lot of street artists are very good at just, kind of converting everyday sights into, and I'm not telling you to be graffiti artists, but it's a good exercise to imagine what you could do with the landscape, what possibilities are lurking there. Conditional thinking, I guess, is what this is called. For the book, in addition to just ideas that I kind of made up, I used some ideas from other people that I interviewed, including Dan Ariely, the behavioral economist, who had a neat idea about observing the forces that motivate people in certain situations, like why do people go on dates in dark, loud places? Well, maybe it has to do with wanting to be close together and so on. I borrowed some idea from my friend Paula Antonelli, who has this charming thing of pick an object that you would interview and write down the questions that you would like to ask it. And then one of my favorites was Seth Godin, who's a sort of a business guru. And this isn't exactly how he put it, but he said find something the thrust of it was find something to complain about. Look for things that are broken that could be fixed. And complaining gets a bad rap. It does. But I want to say a few words in defense of complaining, because I think it's not such a bad thing, and I think it's kind of also at the essence of what designers do. This is James Murphy from LCD Sound System. He didn't actually say this, but it's kind of a distillation of his discussion of why he started the band. He was hanging out with his friends complaining all the time about the kind of music that they wanted to hear, and suddenly realized that their argument would have a lot more force if they were making that music instead of just complaining about other people failing to make it. But my favorite thing about the way Seth positioned this is if I think it's broken, you get to say the same thing. The idea isn't to look for what everyone else thinks is a problem. It's to look for what you think is a problem, and you can't be wrong. And I'll give you an example of how I applied this in a project that I was involved in. That some of you, there are some familiar faces in the audience tonight. I know some of you have heard this. I'm sorry. It's part of my stump speech, and it's important. So here's how this project came about, the Hypothetical Development Organization. One day, I was walking my dog. We lived in Savannah at the time. And as an aside, I'll say, if I leave you with one thing tonight, it's that when you're walking your dog, don't be looking at your phone. Be with your dog. Just be with your dog. Just that one thing. Okay, so I was walking my dog, and you know these kind of signs that say it's on an abandoned building, and it announces, here's the exciting future that's coming. This new thing is going to be here. Aren't you excited? Aren't you into it? And I realized, like, you know, I've been walking past this sign for more than 2 years, and nothing has happened. And in fact, that building is for sale. Nothing is going to happen to that building at any time in the near future. That is a purely hypothetical future. So we thought that was an interesting idea, me and a couple of partners. And we identified a bunch of sort of neglected buildings around New Orleans and came up with ridiculous futures for them, like that would become the Museum of the Self. And we had them professionally rendered and printed on real signs, coroplast signs, and installed on the buildings without permission. I was not involved in this part, hands-free. I know this is being taped. And they became part of the environment. And they became these sites of commentary or delight or mystification or whatever. We did them all around the city. And sometimes people ask, well, were you trying to fool someone? Or it's like, I don't think anyone really believed that this was going to happen. This Candy Chang is the artist there. And there's her building. And this was one last one. I have a pet thing about no loitering signs. And so I thought there should be a loitering center, a building that's just exclusively for loitering. So it's the New Orleans Loitering Center. And as you can see, it attracts an interesting crowd in the hypothetical future where this exists. So anyway, we had a lot of fun with it, and this ended up being part of the official United States presentation and the Venice Architecture Biennale one year, which is pretty exciting and certainly better than we could have done if we had just sat around and complained. So a super rewarding experience, but also kind of an interesting example of what I'm trying to do when I talk about noticing is talking about habit forming, but I'm also trying to talk about habit breaking. Because I think it's very easy for us to get into these routines. And commuting is a classic example. How do you get to, you know the most efficient way to work, so that's the way you go, and you go that way every time. Why would you do anything different? And eventually you get to a point in your life where you do everything that way, and that's, as a friend of mine says, the more efficient you are, the faster time goes, and that's not really such a worthy goal all the time. And so I know there's this cult of productivity now, but as another friend of mine puts it, the real goal should be, as she says, is to have more nows. And you don't have any nows when you're just going over the same route for the millionth time. So every once in a while, change your route. And I mean that metaphorically, of course. It doesn't have to just be your physical commute. But the designer Jim Coudal talks explicitly about how important it is to solve a problem that you've solved before, but in a new way. The other source of ideas for the book were students of mine. Molly mentioned that I teach in the Products of Design program upstairs. And that class is called Point of View. And I think that having a distinct point of view has to kind of start with noticing, have to start with seeing things that other people missed. And so I have an assignment that is just practice paying attention. And that's the whole assignment. They have a week to do it. And obviously the point is for them to come back and say how they resolved such a vague thing. And it's a fun one for me. I don't know if the students enjoy it or not, but they surprised me from the beginning with ideas that had to do with other people, interacting with strangers, interacting with other people, which I'm sort of an introvert person. I like to spy on other people. I don't like to talk to them. You can talk to me afterwards, okay. But it was eye-opening to me how many ideas they had about talking to strangers or interacting with strangers, and made me think about how other people can be the source of, we should notice the environment, we should notice it in all our senses, we should notice as we move around, and we should notice things in other people, and we can learn from that too. So this is a little bit of a roundabout way of starting such a conversation, but one of my things that I actually do this, just when you're at a friend's house, when you're at someone's office, when you're almost anywhere, just ask about the weirdest thing in the room. There's probably a good story, and it's a good, easy icebreaker with somebody. Another project that I'm involved in, Project Object, is sort of devoted to this idea. My collaborator, Josh Glenn, and I have run well over 100 stories about people's individual objects. This Kevin Brockmeyer has this Wendy's car, and the story with it is that he bought it on a date with a young woman when he was in high school, and they went from Wendy's to the movies, and he ran it through her hair, and that was a really bad mistake. And they spent the rest of the evening picking it out of her hair. This is my friend Anne Giselson, a writer, terrific writer. These are her wisdom teeth that she keeps wrapped up. And writer Cynthia Joyce teaches at Ole Miss, and this is her melodica, I guess. That there's a whole story of sibling rivalry. I'll tell you this one real quick. It's a radio producer named Kalila Holt. Terrific story. What you can't tell in this is that this is framed. And the backstory is that basically her grandmother and her mother thought it was hilarious. It goes to this trip that they took together where her underwear was, all their clothes were wet. And she thought, well, I need some dry underwear. And the grandmother thought the best solution to the problem would be to just throw it in the microwave. It doesn't work. Why they decided to frame it is sort of what the piece is about, and it's like there's no clear answer. It's really weird. We've got many of those at the pilot of the Project Object thing, which has been going on for a couple of years, and we just launched a new series called Fetish, so check that out. But that brings us to the kind of final step in this process, the way I think about noticing, which is sort of almost interior. The way that my editor put it was pretty straightforward. It was first you look around, then ultimately you look inside. And I like that. And it reminded me of another idea that came from a student. I can't remember if it was the first or second year that I did this assignment. And he was sitting there as we were going over results. And he said, you know, I blew it. I misunderstood the assignment. I didn't do it right because what I did is I bought this cactus, and he had bought a cactus, and he had it there with him. And he said, I've just been taking care of it all week. And I said, yeah, well, I mean, that's not what I had in mind. But it's kind of on point because this is kind of ultimately what noticing and what attention comes down to, is focusing on the things, choosing what to care about, right? And that's exactly why, you know, we need to have these moments where we break away from thinking about what everybody else is looking at and letting other people control our attention or judge our attention. Because we live in this culture now that's so dominated by trending topics, so it's easy to think, well, there's this thing that I'm noticing and that I really care about, but no one else is talking about it. So I guess it's not that important. And I couldn't disagree more. I think the exact opposite is true. I think that that's what leads to that noticing the thing that other people overlooked is what leads to, you know, things like this article that had such an influence on me, and that, you know, show how we can kind of take inspiration from the way someone like Phil Patton looked at the world and the confidence that he had that the things he noticed did matter and that other people should notice them too. I think that's really important, and it's what I try to tell students, and it's what I am trying to tell you now. The things that you notice that no one else does, those are the most important things. And that can include not just things, but people. And I'm going to close this out by stealing an idea from Mr. Rogers. A friend of mine just recently sent me this clip. I'm not going to play the clip. A clip of Fred Rogers accepting an Emmy in 1998 or something like that. And he did this really beautiful thing in his talk, and I'm going to read it. And this time I'm not kidding. I actually want you to do this. Don't just listen to it, do it. It won't take long. And you don't have to jump up and down or anything. It's interior. But here's what he said. And this is to this room full of Hollywood stars who were excited to be in the presence of Mr. Rogers. Here's what he said. He said, all of us have special ones who have loved us into being. Would you just take, along with me, 10 seconds to think of the people who helped you become who you are, those who have cared about you and wanted what was best for you in life. 10 seconds of silence. I'll watch the time. Whomever you've just been thinking about, how pleased they must be to know the difference you feel they've made. So says Fred Rogers. And all I can add is that, to me, that's the essence of the art of noticing, is really focusing on the things that matter to you and that you care about. So surprise yourself, pay attention to what grabs your attention, ask why, ask whether it's something that could be fixed, or whether it's something that could be explained or enjoyed, and if it needs to be enjoyed by other people, or if it's just enough for you to enjoy it. Because the things you notice that everyone else overlooked are the things that make you, you. All right, so we'll do some Q&A. If you like this kind of thing, I have a newsletter. I want to thank you so much. You've been really terrific.
Maybe one more round of applause.
You got your moon.
I have. As Molly said, I'm Anne Quito. I was actually in Phil's class, so I've been thinking about him all day. So I thought I would bring his syllabus, and I'm going to read a part of it, which is part of my first question to Rob. There's a part here which is 25% of our grade, where he says, a key goal of this course is to make us look at things in new and surprising ways. So students are also asked to bring in brief items I called I noticed. But others might call this show and tell, and that are relevant to the class and will surprise and delight us. These can be a simple image, an object, or a sentence. I wonder if you noticed something on the way here. What might you tell Phil?
On the way here, well, I can tell you something that I noticed in this neighborhood, and that I always pay attention to now, and that I almost talked about in the talk, is you all know what standpipes are, right? The sort of fire, what do you call it, hydrant-like thing. In this neighborhood, there are certain blocks where there are concentrations of them that have like spikes all over them to keep people from sitting on them. And this incredible array of designs that I've always thought would make a good walking tour to just like sort of, and I don't know what the backstory is, like if there was some kind of outbreak of sitting on standpipes in this neighborhood and they just like, there was competition, or if it's like some sort of like Ben Catcher thing where it's like this is the neighborhood where there were two designers fighting with each other about standpipes. So I'd probably go with something like that.
That's great. You might get an A. One of my favorite parts of the book is a section called What to Look For in a Museum, which we didn't cover. I practice this. I've sort of like created this like weird exercise for myself I call museum diet, where I'll only look at 3 things, no matter what it is, and just kind of like spend time with them as an act of thought monogamy. I was wondering if you could tell us your own museum habits. How do you parse something like the Met?
Yeah, well, my favorite thing in this, so I'm going to give you 2 answers. One is definitely in the book, which is eavesdropping. I really enjoy, and this is, I don't want to, some of the people who are here tonight have inspired things that are in the book also, and I don't want to embarrass anybody. But one of the valuable things that I have learned in the last few years is how to think about other people talking that I don't want to hear, as something that's an opportunity and not an annoyance. Now, it's not always possible to do that, but there are certain situations where instead of viewing it as like, hey man, you're messing up my Vermeer moment or whatever, it's fun to just think, to listen in and think about how ridiculous people can be sometimes. So that's number one. I do that all the time. Number two is a little bit of a cheat, but is also in the book, but moves us out of the museum. There was an incident when my wife and I'm very interested in these incidents that'll come up in the press from time to time where like there'll be a pair of glasses left on the floor and someone will start taking pictures of it and then everyone gathers around and like they think it's art and it just sort of becomes art. My wife and I were at a museum in New Orleans once and we went into one gallery space where there's just these big wooden boxes in the middle of the room. And we were like, well, is there art in the box or is the box the art? And trying to look for cues and trying to realize how stupid we felt, like we needed a plaque to. So we just decided it's the art, this is the art. And we do that all the time now, where if we just see something, I have a challenge in the book about like just declare something to be art. This is a Duchamp moment. Like you just see it and say like, you know what, that's art. So
you're rebelling against curators, essentially, upending.
I don't think I'm just trying to have a good day. You know?
I was wondering, can noticing be taken to an extreme? I ask this because I think I have friends who are kind of like wine lovers who like to talk for 10 minutes before taking a sip, or kind of like connoisseurs who seem quite picky, I don't know, and ruin the experience for the rest of us. I don't know. Can noticing be taken to an extreme?
Are you trying to tell me something?
No, I'm asking.
Well, we were just talking moments ago that maybe one extreme is that maybe Phil actually noticed too much while he was driving. But then the point was made that noticing while driving is actually maybe a really good trait. I don't know. I think it's like anything else. Yes, in the sense that if you go overboard, then you're spending so much time looking for esoterica, then you are missing important things. But we're so far in the other direction right now and so obsessed with paying attention to what everyone else is paying attention to that I think just little bits of this are a nice compliment. So I'm not too worried about it. I don't think I'm worried. Of all the worries that you have when a book comes out, it's not like, is this just going to get too damn popular? What will the consequences be? I'll just have to deal with it.
So I noticed in the book, there's one example where the author suggests that you post something online and attach a hashtag, and then you kind of like coyly say, but you don't have to. I wonder how you feel about using Tumblr and Instagram as kind of like museums or forums for things we notice.
Right. I actually do have mixed feelings about this. There are plenty of examples in the book of things that are, things that I found on Instagram or that I admire, online projects that I admire. I guess that what I try to discourage, though, is feeling like every single thing you do in life needs to be turned into some kind of popular personal marketing stunt or whatever. Like it can have just as much value. That security camera thing I mentioned, I did write a little bit of stuff about it, but the value of that to me was very personal, and it wasn't about, oh, this became the basis of this important thing that changed everyone's life. Obviously, some of the examples I have did become, these are projects that became realized that started with noticing, but I'm a big believer in the idea that just being engaged with the world is not a means to an end. It is an end. It's a good thing to do, and it makes your life better. And it has ways of improving things that go beyond the tangible and the obvious. So it doesn't mean, like, I just worry that people get so into this idea that becomes the yardstick. It's not that they're taking any value away from the practice, but that they only measure it by like, well, how many new followers did I get as a result of doing this thing? And that kind of thing just kind of makes me a little sad.
Me too.
So, yeah. So that's why on that, and that particular exercise was follow the quiet. It's like go to the quietest place you can find. And then, you send us your results in the hashtag or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. And, we're obviously using hashtags to promote this book, and I would love it if you would write to me about what you've done. All of that applies. But on the other hand, you don't have to. And you can just go to the quietest place and just be in the quietest place. That's pretty rewarding.
Why is your handle not Rob Walker?
Because my Twitter handle is not Rob Walker. It was, my usual answer to this is just yet another in a series of disastrous personal branding decisions that have dogged me throughout my career. I'm always doing the wrong thing. I didn't take Twitter very seriously when it came along. I sign up for things a lot for work reasons. The name Rob Walker was already taken. I didn't want to do Walker Rob or Robbo or anything like that, so I thought not Rob Walker. I had a conversation once about this with Dan Savage, because his is fake Dan Savage. He was in the same boat where Dan Savage was already taken, so he didn't know what to do. But yeah, it's a problem, and then like people will actually write like, well, are you Rob Walker? No, not for you, I'm not.
A lot of the examples in the book are kind of like analog prompts. Do you think can noticing be done effectively in the digital realm as well? Like, can we pause a game and notice the architecture of the castle, or?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I think I was just talking to to some students the other day about a good example of this that I think was in the book, but I took it out. Or maybe I just thought about putting it in. But the artist, is it Corey Archangel, I think is how it's pronounced? He does these terrific pieces that are almost literally what you just said, that they're hacked Donkey Kong cartridges with everything removed except the blue sky and the clouds drifting by. And it's kind of beautiful, and it is like a great, underneath that technological feat, is this just very simple, pure, and kind of beautiful act of noticing something. And the fact that it's nature-oriented kind of heightens it. So yeah, I definitely think it's possible. And I use that, one of the examples I use in this talk, the Upside Down N, that's an online project of people contributing to like a message board. So sort of applying noticing to this digital realm. I'm not super against
not super
technology.
pro, new person.
Yeah, it's similar to the way that I feel about turning it into a creative act, is that I think technology, as long as you're using, or I think I actively say like misuse your tools, as long as you're the one controlling the direction, then I think it can be fine. There's opportunities.
So the intent is crucial. So you sort of throughout the book, you kind of like define noticing in such an elastic term. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know what you think is the opposite of noticing. What is the antonym of noticing?
Well, I think the antonym is letting someone, you mean a single word?
Whatever.
I think it's letting others control your attention. I think it's when you spend all of your time looking, and I mean looking in the broadest sense, in the direction that someone wants you to look in. That's why I say that my one parameter of that first experiment was I have to be hunting for someone that no one particularly wants me to see. And this is when I do assignments with students, that's always the parameter. It has to be something that, it can't be something that was designed to be seen. And there are a lot, and you think like, well, everything is designed. No, a lot of things are not really meant to be seen. And no one cares if you see them or not. That's the stuff that's hardest to zero in on, and that's the stuff so the antonym would be letting your attention be directed by others.
So Nazis.
Nazis?
I'm going to ask a last question to give folks a chance to ask questions. We have 5 minutes. So you dedicate this book, I noticed, to E. Who is E?
My wife.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Should I just shout it out, or should I speak to someone else?
There's one mic, so.
Shout it, you can repeat it.
Okay.
So thank you for the 7 strategies. I look forward to reading about the 124 other ones. Speaking of which, why 131?
Good question, because we had this debate about, so we had this debate about should it be 100, should it be 101, and it was actually my, I said I think we should go with the Cosmo theory, Cosmo magazine, for those of you who know. There's always 167 ways to have an orgasm or whatever, and it's always like a prime number. Like, so I just wanted that. So we just got to like a number that we felt was the right, and it also felt like there was a certain honesty to it of like, well, this is how many we have. So But I appreciate that question, because you'd be surprised how much debate went into deciding this.
How long did you spend gathering examples?
Well, it depends on how you measure it, because this sat around for a long time. There was a period when the idea for this book was very different, and it was going to be kind of a book more about the attention panic with a thing at the end, like 290 pages of the problem and then 10 pages of the potential solution. And I just sort of realized, like, I didn't care about everyone knows already. You don't need to be told that. And at least 10 books have been written about that since, right? So I'm glad someone else did that. I just wanted to get to the part. But it took a couple years of just sitting around and me kind of gathering material. And then once it got going, I mean, it was done pretty quickly, 6 months, a year, something like less than that. Because I started out, once I knew that it was really going to, once I said this is what it's going to be, I could compile stuff, I could start asking around. It built on itself. I was having a ball. I had more fun writing this than I have had writing any certain book project, that's for sure.
That's great. Any more questions? Yes?
When I heard the first time the title of your book, I thought immediately about the famous book of George Nelson, How to See.
It's mentioned in there, yeah.
And which has obviously certain similarities, but also the Inzas wrote in various occasions about curiosity, about art of seeing. So now 50 years passed or so, how do you see like your approach different from that, say, classic approach of seeing and noticing?
Well, I think that I'm a little bit more, I'm not making any big theoretical statements in this book. And I think there's a lot of sort of theory of seeing and so on. And the thing about Nelson's book, How to See, is it's really a book about how he sees. He said himself that, like, really I should have called this book How I See. It's not really a how-to guide. Like, this is very explicitly written as, like, these are things to do. And there's a range of difficulties. Some of them are just look out a window. Some of them are more complicated and have to do with trying to find things that, like, exist outside the traditional five senses, like what it feels like to have almost be touched, stuff like that. So it tries to go in those directions, but in a more approachable, doable way. It's meant to be stuff you do. Does that answer what you're looking for? Okay.
Any more questions? Yes?
I was wondering, did you have a criteria that you set for what would be included in the book and what wouldn't?
Not in a specific way. I wanted everything to be either, if not doable, then at least provocative enough that it would really have an effect on the way. And I actually rank them, 1 to 4 degree of difficulty. So so you can flip through and find the easy ones if you just want to do that. I want, the only criteria, there were a couple that got taken out because of, they were just too either dangerous or legally dodgy.
For example.
Just like, walking through strange neighborhoods, just things like that where we didn't want to get in trouble. And there was one interesting example actually is, there's this series of riffs on look like, look at the world like you're a historian, look at the world like you're a child. And there was one that was look at the world, look like prey, meaning like you're looking around like this, right? And that came from the fact that I was once walking my dog and we got attacked by another dog. And to this day, it affects the way I look around when I'm walking, because I don't want it to happen. It was very traumatic. But my editor felt like that idea, look like prey, was too, she was like, as a woman, I just don't want to read that. And I said, that's fair. So we took it out. So we didn't have hard and fast criteria, but we had to make judgments as we went along.
Yes, sir.
You've inspired me to look around this room, and I just noticed that there's a switch there that is above the height of most normal sized people. And usually when a switch is high, a bell is high, so the kids won't press it. And so I've seen that in apartment buildings, but I've never seen a switch that has been that high. And it's connected by a series of conduits to other things. So now I'm terribly curious about what that controls.
Well, the thing that you don't know is that the faculty at Design Research is very tall.
I have a follow-up.
But it's a good question.
to that one. What about the conduit that goes from that side all the way over to this side?
Yeah.
Is that
No, so you see, it works. And I did a thing at Tulane, and I gave these kids an assignment. They had a week to find something to complain about, and they had to, we should have compiled a design brief at the end of it, because they had so many excellent things about how the line at the cafeteria works and how the bike rack situation, all this stuff that was oh, these are problems that should be fixed, but. I don't know what happened, but it does work. Once you sort of give people that prompt, useful things can come of it.
Well, with that, please tell Rob anything else you noticed out in the drinks area. But please, one more round of applause for Rob Walker.
Thank you.